Thank you so much, Brother Michael. Glad to have everyone here this morning. Sorry that Brother Coates could not be here. Well, we're glad to have everybody here but Daniel Denham. I think he's off writing another chapter. It's about 300 pages long. But, you know, you have to have somebody like that in every crowd, so we bear with it. I might mention that the last issue of Contending for the Faith deals with some things that sound much like what we have been noticing in the 19th century digressive movement to lead people away, in which they did from the cause of Christ and developed into the Christian church and finally into the disciples of Christ as they split later on themselves. And you might want to take a look at that, and if you don't subscribe to it, then I'm telling you now you ought to. We won't go any further than that, but you ought to. Brother Paul Vine has edited and written a good part of a book called Triumph and Tragedy. It covers the restoration in Kentucky, and he reminded me of what is in that in chapter on Barton Warren Stone. We were talking yesterday trying to set the theme or the environment of the unity movements and why they were so necessary, and really what they were, an effort to get people simply to accept one another and no matter what they believe. Brother Tim Nichols and all of his lunarianism was able to do a great job on that a while ago. And we both realized that those terms sound so real and the silliness that people believe that those who weren't at the joke as it began at the Denton lectures in the open forum, and then yesterday that probably be to be told that that's not real. People aren't doing that was a joke coming out of the fermented imagination of Tim Nichols and a few other ferments. But and what was it he said, Brother Dub, about wickedness or evil? No, well, if we're going to operate that way, then there's a whole lot of things I can't ask you. But it was exceedingly, no, it wasn't wicked or evil, very, well, don't go into that. Alzheimer's will be here. Anyway, Brother Vaughn brought this out, and we want to begin again today because now this was in 1844 that Stone said this in a letter to the Church of Christ scattered abroad throughout the United States of America, originally published in the Christian Messenger, his paper, volume 14, page 117. Here's what he said. Now, this is 1844. Think of how close that was to the time that the church was actually restored. But here's what he said regarding the departure that he feared and saw possibly to come. He says, "My dear brethren, we have advanced and become a great people. Now is the time of danger. Now there is need of humility, watchfulness, and prayer. Israel were often seduced from the true worship of God to the idolatry and communion of the nations among which they dwelt. And this always took place in the days of their prosperity. So we may be so captivated by the doctrines, forms, popularity, and respectability of the sects around us, that we may try to accommodate the truth of God to their prejudices in order to gain their favor, and eventually to enlist them on our side and join in our mighty union. Such union is no better, if as good, as that of the Romanists, who are exceedingly zealous for union. A union of 10 pious, uncompromising persons in the truth is better than 10,000 of the contrary character. Truth must never be sacrificed for the union of numbers. Truth preached and lived in the Spirit will cut it away through all oppositions." And you know, that's just as fresh as any sound gospel preacher could preach it. 1844, over 150 years ago, that these men who were instrumental in restoring the church could already see with great growth that there was the great danger of what we began to point out yesterday. Now, I ended yesterday with a rather lengthy reading of the Sand Creek Declaration. 6,000 people gathered there. And of course, they were very concerned about the innovations that had been going on for a long time. And from the point really of the 1870s, we'll mark it about there, on up till the actual registering of two different religious bodies, the Christian Church, the Church of Christ, 1906, then you have all manner of heartache, going to court, etc., etc. I want to read this before we get into some matters directly connected with the unity, or the union as it really would be called. This had to do with the matter of the digression in Texas. And may I say this, by 1900, 90% of all church buildings and lands owned by the Lord's people had gone into the hands of the digressive. Middle Tennessee didn't feel it quite that way because of the influence of the gospel advocate to a great extent. But that's how far it had gone in Texas. And really, the Lord's Church in Texas, up until our present digression, has been building back since 1900. Not that long ago, not even 100 years. And yet look how far we've gone, almost full circle, and even probably worse. A brother Billingsley, can't call his name, Price Billingsley, yes sir. He noted in the very early 1905 or 6, when he went into Abilene, nothing but the Christian church there then, that he got the church going again, but he mentions in a report to one of the papers that he would preach in his tent at night, and then after the services had closed, the digressive would come in and cut his tent to pieces, and he would spend all the next day trying to sew up the patches. Now that's the kind of stuff that was going on. It went on for years. I want to read this. At Denton, Brother Dove, the instrument was pushed into the church late in 1893. P.B. Hall, who was president at that time, wrote T.R. Burnett of Dallas the following. Dear Brother Burnett, I witnessed one of the saddest affairs last Lord's Day that I ever witnessed in my life. The church at Denton has been in trouble for some time over the organ and other things, until a few weeks ago, when those in favor of the organ had called a meeting with Brother W.L. Thurman for chairman, and withdrew from all the brethren who opposed them. Those who were excluded were the most faithful and devoted brethren in the church at Denton. Brother A. Alsop had been employed by the elders of the church to labor for them, but those in favor of the organ were not satisfied to let him preach in the house. So, when we met last Lord's Day to hear Brother Alsop, they refused to let him preach in the house. Some of those in favor of the organ went so far as to say, quote, that a man who would not use the organ in worship was not fit to preach in any church in Texas, unquote. Now, they may talk about the inconsistency of making rebaptism a test of fellowship, but how does it look to make the using of the organ a test of fellowship? When the brethren were refused the use of the house, they bore it patiently, and I did not hear an unkind word from any of them. They turned then and asked them if they would take the house they had built with their own hands, turn them out of doors, and for all their labors give them not a cent. They made no reply. As the old gray-headed brethren arose and walked out of their own house, you know not how bad I felt. Now I have tried to keep from being prejudiced towards our progressive brethren, but I just know it is wrong to take a person's property without paying for it. Now that's the kind of stuff that went on, and it's no different. It's characteristic of these thieves right down to the present day, and will always be characteristic of such. Now, therefore, as I say, we set the mood of all of this. Why then would they even talk about unity meetings? Again, I say they do not mean unity as the Bible talks about unity, or such as is set out in Ephesians 4. They mean let's all agree to disagree and do our own thing, and mainly let us tell you what to do. Because really you haven't got sense enough to come in out of the rain, but we do. They will always practice on you what they condemn in you. They do it every time because they're that arrogant and stupid, I guess is the best way to put it. But some of my brethren have seen through some of that, I don't believe, till yet. Now here is what Burnett said later on in what he published in 1895, Burnett's Budget. He said, this budget becomes more and more convinced every day that it will become necessary to establish churches of the apostolic order in every town in the state where the so-called Christian church now holds sway. The lawless determination of the society and Oregon people to rule or ruin every church with which they have connection, and either put in the unscriptural things or put out the brethren who oppose them, makes this plainly evident. The loyal brethren need not waste any valuable time waiting for a reformation, for there is none in prospect. I wish some of my own brethren would realize that about what's going on now. He says Ephraim is joined to his idols, and he would rather have his society and music idol than any kind of Christian union known to the Bible. Brethren, proceed to reestablish the ancient order of things, just as if there was never a Church of Christ in your town. It's come to that now, brethren, in many places. Gather all the brethren together who love Bible order better than modern fads and foolishness, and start the work and worship of the church in the old apostolic way. Do not go to law over church property. It's better to suffer wrong than to do wrong. That's, of course, his view. Build a cheap and comfortable chapel and prove it when you get able. It is better to have 12 true disciples in a cheap house than 1,000 apostate pretenders in a palace love modern innovations better than Bible truth. The battles of this Reformation have yet to be fought. It's an ongoing thing. I believe those points help us get in mind exactly what needs to be before us. Now, there's one other thing I want to bring out to notice about the colleges of the time, because every one of them went off into digression. We mentioned yesterday about the establishment of the Bethany College and Pendleton's involvement with it, and how they were behind all the digressive moves that they could be. And it's rather interesting to study all about the College of the Bible and the Christian Scholar, which is the book that was published some time ago, and I think is back in print concerning Hall Laurie Calhoun. But I want you to hear what Brother West had to say, and then there will be a quote in this. Well, first of all, we just notice the quote. As L.F. Biddle pointed out as early as 1873 in his letters to Jacob Kreth, it had rather been the tendency of colleges to fall in line behind the popular sides of issues in the brotherhood. Colleges, as a general rule, will, as a matter of policy, pursue for a time a midway safe course until it's known which side will be the most popular, and then will jump with full force on that side. Colleges, as a general rule, have not fostered the thinking of brethren on certain issues, but rather have reflected the opinion of the majority after the issues have arisen. Consciously or unconsciously, this has been the tendency. The reason is clear. Colleges must have money to operate, and if they get too unpopular, they will not have enough funds to run. Now, I think in our generation that the colleges have fostered a great amount of what's what, and it hasn't just been the papers that have done it. The papers, too many times, at least some of them, have been captured by those who of the same disposition of heart as some of the goofballs in the colleges. But nevertheless, this sets the issue. Can you imagine, or we can now in view of the past 30, 35 years of the church, but for 50 to 60 years of the 19th century, as soon as the church was restored, immediately, there was the inner working deleted away. Now, folks, listen. Doesn't that really stand true to the pattern of mankind always? Hadn't the Bible already caused us to understand that's the way it's going to be? That men will not stay with truth very long? And Brother Stone saw that as early as 1844, and he was one of the beginners of the whole thing, and yet he could see what was happening. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, we shouldn't be surprised then to realize that these folks are going to pretend to be for unity. And in reality, it has nothing to do with being unified on the basis of a thus saith the Lord, or as the New Testament authorizes us, or by Bible authority. Now, coming on down to the late part of the 19th century, again Burnett reported that there had been some by that time, after about 40 years, just now willing to debate. Burnett reported in 1898 and said that one had emerged in the person of Clark Braden, who was willing to make an attempt in defending instrumental music in debate with Brother Joe Worley. Wouldn't you like to have been there? Half has never yet been told. This was a mistake for the digressive cause. That's a mildly putting it. That's what he says. Now, there were a number then started. Warlick Braden, Curfews Calhoun, Warlick Stark, Reed Boaz, Hall Pendleton, Strigley Bryany, Hall Walker, Bowles Clubb, Hardeman Boswell, Wallace Walker, Wallace Barber, Wallace Hunt. And the last four have been more in our times, especially the last three. Those were G.K. Wallace and those last three. Now, coming down more to the actual beginning of some sort of union meetings, M.C. Curfews has left some information regarding a meeting which was held in Nashville, Tennessee on Thursday, February 17, 1909. I think really, to put it in a country fashion, what really got the digressives goat is when they were actually listed in the census of being a church completely separate apart from the Church of Christ. Now that cut off a great amount of their opportunity to continue to pull away people. Now you think about it for a moment. If every one of the apostate churches today would take Church of Christ down off their door, there'd be a lot of brethren, because I hate to say it this way, but it's true, they're just that simple-minded, who that would be the only thing that would probably make them leave. We just didn't have Church of Christ above the door. They don't know enough about the Bible to come in out of the rain and to know the New Testament identifying marks of the church. But if you take Church of Christ off the door, then they might leave. Well, this virtually took Church of Christ off the door in many cases. Not so much up north, Indiana, Illinois, in some places, because many of those did not put Christian church out front, so to speak. They still continue to this day under Church of Christ, but they're nothing more than the independent Christian church in many of those places. So you just can't go by one singular identifying mark to know what the church is. It takes the composite of the identifying marks in the New Testament to know what that is. Well, Brother Curfews reported that he was invited to Nashville to meet with others, quote, to see if we could find common ground on which all can work and worship. Now, that's rather amazing in 1909 that they were trying to find common ground. What does that tell you about the disposition of heart of the digressives concerning the common ground of New Testament authority? It's always been there, has it not? And was not that the plea of Campbell and others of that time to say, here is the common ground. Here is the way that we can all be what the New Testament says we ought to be, one in Christ, and how to do that. I don't know what Brother Curfews and the faithful brethren were thinking. I think they were probably trying to do what they could. They did meet with them. And by the way, I think in the book that Brother Coates gives a list of both sides, the digressives as well as the others. But I suppose you're trying to learn what you can do, what's going to take place. I think it was said, Brother Lester, you said that you met with one when you thought that you had the opportunity to expose the error and defend the truth, but then you thought you had another meeting like that, and you got there, it wasn't going to allow that kind of thing. But it may be that they were operating under the same assumption that we can get there and see what we can do. Or maybe they were just feeling out the waters. Are these people really wanting to renounce their innovations? I think you can go that far to find out if that's the case, but that's about as far. And then sometimes there's no use to go that far because you've already gone that far. You already know by their fruits what they are up to when they will not try to do only what is authorized by the Bible. This apostate J.B. Bryan, he made some kind of proposal in which he envisioned a new work beginning over in a different section of Nashville. Think about this for a moment regarding what goes on in Nashville today and move it back to the early part of this century. It's about the same situation there today as it was then. Curfews and Pendleton were set up to work in this new work, and they would both leave the Oregon Society out of the new work. They would be on, quote, common ground, and thus be united. Well, that's that business of saying we just won't say anything about what brings up our problems. When I first moved to Van Buren, Arkansas, I received a call from the Disciples of Christ preacher. He wanted me to be involved in one of the meetings that they had. I said, I appreciate your invitation, but I cannot be involved with you. He said, well, why not? We just get together and have a good time. And I thought, well, yeah, that's just about what it all involves. And I said, well, there would be, if I really got with you, we would have to discuss some matters pertaining to the Bible, wherein we disagree that if we're able to have Bible unity, we'll have to come to a conclusion to abide by those things. So he said, like what? Well, I said, well, nothing more like what it takes to become a Christian, and more specifically, what the Bible teaches on baptism. You know what his next response was? We don't have to talk about that. And I simply said, well, yes, we would if I came. And I said, thank you anyway. But that's the general attitude. It doesn't change. There is nothing new under the sun. None whatsoever. People operate the same way if they love the truth or if they don't love the truth. Well, Curfews and the brethren readily accepted the proposal, and they lauded the idea of, quote, common ground, unquote. McQuilly raised the point of extending that common ground area outward to 1,000,000 miles. If brethren could find common ground in 10 square feet, and such was the proposal, and if unity was the goal, then that common ground should extend just as fast as division existed. If not, why not? Well, you can understand from that kind of comment why the Christian church people there sort of squirmed when they heard that kind of proposal, because they knew where he was headed, and that is the common ground is the Bible, and it ought to be extended out to everybody. Well, that didn't work too well, and the meeting adjourned with the digressives proposing but disposing of any and everything which would even look like the unity of the Spirit as set out, that is, in Ephesians 4. Now, That kind of thing went on here and there in the late part of the 19th century and the very, very early part of this century. But then they came up with what's called the Commission on Unity. The Commission on Unity. Now, why did they do this? They were already at that early date beginning to lose people because of the namby-pambyism and nothingness of their teaching. It didn't offer anything to anybody. In the Christian Standard of 1917, this Commission on Unity is set out. And here can be found nothing less than a boiling cauldron centering around the modernism and German rationalism and infidelity, which was at saturation point in the College of the Bible in Lexington. And this is where I would invite you to study The Christian Scholar by Choate and Doran on Paul Calhoun. I guess he was about the first PhD from a noted secular school among us. And of course he went with the Christian church for a long time. In later life he came out of that. But nevertheless, he points out, and it is pointed out in these particular studies, that is, these papers, that these young men were simply losing their faith in all this kind of thing. And without knowing all the specifics, you can just about begin to understand why they would come up with such a Commission on Unity. In an article published by F.B. Strigley in May 18, 1922, in the Gospel Advocate, entitled The Commission on Unity, Strigley wrote that he had received a letter which he printed as follows. Now, this is when the Christian church was circulating O. E. Payne's book trying to justify, defend, and promote mechanical instrumental music. They had sent these things out, but they intended for them, once they had been read, to be sent back to them on this Commission on Unity. So, this is dated West Nashville, Tennessee, May 1st, 1922. Dear Sir and Brother, we sent you last year a copy of O. E. Payne's book on the church music question. This is from the committee to Strigley. We sent you last year a copy of O. E. Payne's book on the church music question for your consideration and to be returned after reading. We have not yet received the copy sent you, so we're writing to request the return of the same. Fraternally, the Commission on Unity. Well, Strigley in his article had some comments about the letter from the Commission. And here's what he did. He said, who was it that appointed the Commission on Unity? Now, I think that's a legitimate question. Think about that for a minute. Who would set up such a thing as that? Does that sound like some recent, in the last several years, unity meetings of people approving themselves to come together and declare what everybody else will be and will not be and what they believe? Did the members appoint themselves or did others appoint them? For whom did the Commission members speak? Since the Commission on Unity mailed out the book by O. E. Payne, it should be called the Commission on Division, for it certainly helped in splitting congregation. And of course you can imagine how he became one of those that would be called in later years by other such groups knuckleheads. And that seems to be one of those loving taps on the shoulder that comes from folks who can use terms like that, but we dare not do so. Strigley pointed out that there had been unity in Nashville on the music question when brethren met together and sang as they worshiped. This was most evident during the Ryman Auditorium meeting with N.B. Hardeman preaching. In fact, that's what stirred them up as much as anything, because of the great turnout in that particular building. And I must say, we went up and visited one night of the Jubilee and part of the next day last year just to see what we could see. And yet right across from that big auditorium is the Ryman Auditorium. And so I decided I would just walk over there and visit, as they have tours of that because of the Grand Ole Opry having been there. And I couldn't help but think, when you walk in there and look at that and try to visualize, I've seen pictures of N.B. Hardeman standing there and preaching to an audience of 6,000, and they had to turn them away, and they were printed. That is, each morning the sermon he preached the night before was printed in the newspapers. And then to think, in 70 some odd years, what was taking place literally across the street. Someone has said, and we've all said it from time to time, but even now, we're but one generation from apostasy all of the time, brethren. All the time. And that just must be gotten over to us. I say this especially because I know how I've thought as a gospel preacher of over 33 years now, that it's easy when you become so familiar with the fundamentals that you get the idea that everybody else has studied it like you studied it. And they deal with it like you deal with it. And they think with it and along with it all the time and so on and so forth. They don't. Just think, every few years, a child that's 10 years old in just 10 years could be in preacher training school. I still like to think when I was back in my early 20s and I was going over to Freed Hardeman to hear those old lectures and got to hear those old war horses that were still alive then. I'm so thankful for that. And I learned so much going over there. Brother G.K. Wallace and Brother Franklin Count and Guy and Woods and B.C. Goodpasture and Gus Nichols. And does that sound good to hear those names? And to know they were all there. And to hear what they had to say, because they went back, many of these, at least a few of them, to these times. All of them, I guess. And to hear what they had to say from personal experience in fighting these battles. And every once in a while I think, well, that was just yesterday. Well, it wasn't just yesterday as far as young people growing up. And they were born in 1971, 72, 73. Look how old they are. They all gone through preacher training school. They're not preaching. They weren't there then. And that which seems so fresh in my mind is ancient history to these. And so we must constantly, all the time, set these things up, or we have this mess going on over and over again, and I'm persuaded such will be the case. Now, all growing out of all of this stuff of the Commission of Unity, and you had then the Boswell-Hardeman debate, which pretty well turned the Commission on Unity out, especially in Middle Tennessee. It just stopped all that in its tracks. I wish that none of us can who didn't live then, and I don't know that anybody here was living then enough to know what would have been going on in 1922 when he had that debate. But it just shut things down as far as the Christian church was concerned, and these efforts that we're noticing right here. Now I want you to get a point right here. They had all these commissions on unity. They had all these efforts at unity. Nothing but union, agreeing to disagree, let us alone, let's all go right on. Let's not bring these things up. That had been going on now for a good 20 or 25 years, from the 1890s up to 1922. Now when they really had a unity meeting at the Boswell-Hardeman debate, you saw who lost. It was error, and those who promoted it, and the truth was excelled. I get so put out, even sometimes with my own brethren who are not running off after liberal doctrines, when they despair over debates. And they say, oh, debates work evil. Well, brethren, if that's the case, then something's wrong with any preaching. So, people abuse those. Well, people abuse the pulpit every day. They abuse the classroom. They abuse the eldership. They abuse the abuse of something. Abuse can't take place unless the thing is right in the first place. You can't abuse a sin. How many times you got to commit fornication before you abuse it? Not brethren, sometimes don't use what God gave them. For a thing to be abused, it must be right in the first place. Well, when you read the Lord and what the prophets did and the apostles, did they ever engage in controversy and the polemic platform, so to speak? Well, of course they did, all the time. Well, I want to nail down this peg here for the learning thing in these so-called unity meetings. When you have one where two men are able to stand up and fairly represent the issues that they believe, then you can get down to the brass tacks of what really causes the problem and the real New Testament common ground Bible authority that we have to have what we believe in practice. And that's what happened that shut that thing down. Well, that didn't stop the digressives of the Christian church. They still wanted this union. Put this in as a side note. When we lived in Sperry, Oklahoma, working in Tulsa, which is just a little town north of Tulsa, there was an independent Christian church there. And I got the card, and I've forgotten how I got it now, the preacher, but it had Sperry Christian Church. Down at the bottom in quotes, it had not a denomination. And yet it wasn't any time after that to where they had a Thanksgiving service and announced on their sign that they were going to have this Thanksgiving service with the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They couldn't even get with the old one. They had to get with the reorganized. And I think as Brother Keeble said, those are the too late day saints. And that would be then the reorganized too late day saints. But in that case, they're too late. So here they were still saying, they're holding on to phrases, they don't even know what they mean. Here they are, we're not a denomination, but they're down there with those people. So that sounds like our brethren today, doesn't it? Well, in 1934, the International Convention of the Christian Church and Assembly at Des Moines, Iowa, appointed a commission on restudy of the question of unity. Do you realize what these people are doing? They can't come right down to the plain teaching of the Bible and the authority of the New Testament and accept it. So what are they always doing? Running to the counsels and the philosophies and the views and the opinions of their think-sos. There will always be this kind of thing when you won't accept the Bible. So here they are in 1934 doing this. Such men as Frederick D. Kirshner and James DeForest Murch were on the committee. And may I say too, until Brother West, Earl West, came up with the first two volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the Search for the Ancient Order, the only definitive, really good works out there that were really, as I say, definitive on the Restoration movement were produced by the Christian Church. That's one of the reasons that he put these things together, because guess what they did once they got up to about 1870 regarding division? You can know what light they put us in. So there, we have people revising history today. Well, they knew how to revise it to suit themselves. Is one reason Brother West did that. And I may also mention, some thought that when I said at least get volumes 1 and 2, that all of them are not in print. No, by that I meant that for our purposes and to understand really what transpired in the digression, those Volume 1 and Volume 2 are certainly available, but all of them are available that he's written. But those two certainly cover so much, it's so important today. The problems that they faced then are the very ones we face now. There are those who believe in the biblical principle that is the restoration plea, that we're to do only what's authorized and that we're not to do anything that's not authorized or that's prohibited. That's what brought us to the plea. That's what brought us to church. Now what we're hearing in recent years is this. They really weren't that concerned about doing everything just as the Bible authorized it. They were far more concerned with unity. That is a revisionist, ACU, David Lipscomb, denominationally educated modernist professors want to and wish it was viewpoint. That's not true. Go back, the literature's there, go back and study it. The only reason they ever decided that they need to get together is because they looked around all these denominations and the circuit rider would come through, and if he were Methodist, then nobody had anything to do with him, he'd go to the Methodist church. Or if the Presbyterian came by, he'd go to the Presbyterian, and the same with the Baptist. And nobody could get together, and yet here they all had the same Bible. And so they began to think about that a little bit. And honest-hearted men began to say, we can unite on the Bible. And they begin then to go the route to put them into restoring the church. And so we need to realize too that we're not a part, I am not a part of a movement. I am a member of the church that Jesus built and established on the day of Pentecost, purchased by the blood of Christ. Now I'm grateful that men did what they did to help out, and I'm amazed at times what they must have done when they couldn't go down the street to ask the preacher, what does this mean? They studied these things out on their own. But it tells me if they did in their limited resources and helps, we can do it. We can do it if we want to. Now these conclude today's remarks by simply pointing out, as we go through tomorrow, we're going to simply look at more and more of these, I call them simply union meetings, not biblical unity. And we're going to see that the disposition of the people who are involved in all of them, whether it's people coming out of the Church of Christ or those in the Christian church or whatever, that they have the same disposition of the people back in the 19th century. It has not changed at all. Just get along, no matter what. Now, one other thing. What's happening, although we're talking about the Christian church in unity, what's happening is what happened in the Christian church now. They're wanting to go over and embrace any other kind of church. Now, I'll close with this thought. Brother Brard loves to get me in trouble as much as he possibly can, and many times it's a good situation. We have what we call marquee or sign evangelism. Now we came up with that joking. We put a lot of things on that sign, and we've had all sorts of things happen. Especially, let me give you a challenge, Brother Brard. You'll say amen to this. If you want to see how far down the drain our country's gone in morals, begin to put material up on your sign regarding homosexuals, and see how many things are thrown at it. How many people will come and take the letters off and finally then steal them and all this kind of thing. And of course, you know what we do on that. We just put back up there with the person that stole our letters, bring them back. Things like this. But we put up a thing he did the other day regarding, and we've been doing it on denominations, on the Presbyterian church. How did you have it, Bob? No Presbyterian church existed before 1500, and then you put the Lord's church existed and so on. He got a call, and he got so many, he got tired of it, so he said, this is for you. And so this was not a denominational member, at least a part of the denominational church. They were just as denominational minded as they could be. This fellow was all upset. Well, there was a very large Baptist church down the street from the Spring Church of Christ building. And he said, just jumped all over us for putting that up. And let us know he was a member of the church, of a thriving congregation. And, because of computers and software programs, he told me his name, and before the day was over, we knew his address and phone number. But and he shall receive some mail. But thing about it is, he said, I didn't think there were any of you folks left in the Church of Christ. That's what he said. I said, well, now you know. And he said, I asked him, I said, is the Church of Christ found in the Bible? He said, no. I said, what about Romans 16:16? He just neglected it. He just wouldn't deal with it. And he referred me to the Baptist church and how great they were doing, how many numbers they had. He said, how big are y'all? Well, we run roughly 160 on Sunday morning. And when I started to say 100, I got 100 out. And he said, see? I said, how many people are on the ark? What has that got to do with it? Now, here's what happened. I'll end here. I thought that was a pretty good unity meeting on the ark. Here's what happened. I said, what happened to those, by the millions probably, that were not on the ark? I couldn't get an answer. I asked him at least 3 times. And by the way, we had the students listening on the phone just to see how these fellows operate. Finally, he said, and boy, this is an article and a half title, I guess they drowned. That's a quote unquote, I guess they drowned. Thank you.